So that guy named Kratos responded to our last God of War reference video with the novel. Particularly, he was upset about how we discussed or countered, I don't know, debunked, take your pick on this one, one sentence in particular from the novel, specifically the sentence that's used to argue for the world tree being infinite in size. Now, normally when I make a video like this, if TG&K wants to talk about it, he will, hit me up and talk about it. That did happen. Things ended very poorly, but some of the things he said did stick in my head, and I did go back to the sentence for I want to say 2 days afterwards, because some of the things he said caught me a little by surprise, and his perspective was a little strange to me, so I thought I'd go back and actually look at the sentence. Maybe I'm wrong, I'm willing to be wrong. That being said, this video would have come out a lot earlier, but I put the other side video and preparations in front of it, and then I also got sick, so I couldn't really record all that much. So, with the public comment in mind, I'm able to sit down and look at what he said, what his criticisms were of our, I guess, debunk, we'll call it, and I'll be responding to his comment because I think this is going to be probably the most well-structured response, but I think this is going to be the generic response given if we just say it simply and move on. However, after we had our conversation and I went back to it, I did look at the sentence, and after 2 days of going through it, I came to the conclusion that not only is the sentence not saying what they think it says, it's very hard to argue that's even what it means. Because I'll go over his comment in detail, but the sentence doesn't even support his interpretation at all, and I'll explain why. So, first things first, I'll go over what the sentence is, just the sentence itself, and then I'll also go over his comment, so that way, in case you have not seen it, you'll know what I'm responding to, and I'll break it down. So here's the sentence. He swung open the door to reveal mystic gateway to a strange environment, like a tree branch stretching out to infinity. Now here's the comment from that guy named Kratos. Dookie, I have no idea how you can make videos on scaling, yet somehow get all of the scaling incorrect. Also, you somehow don't understand the language you speak. Strange is a determiner for a trait made in speech, and the thing that makes the realm between realms strange to Kratos is the fact that there is a branch that stretches out to infinity. Imagine trying to debunk this with the old head-ass versus battle way of refutation, simile, hyperbole. Now, well, he was a fucking asshole last time we talked, wholesale, fucking dick. That's a fair point. Or at least, I think it's a fair point to some extent, to say that just saying simile or hyperbole might not be enough for some people. Like, it's not enough for them. So, I actually sat down 2 days later, and I was also really fucking mad after our last conversation. Like, I was fucking pissed. And looked through the sentence, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I gave this comment the benefit of the doubt as well. But then I actually read through the sentence. I decided to be really petty for this one. I even got a membership to the Oxford Dictionary, which most people, as I'm sure hopefully TJ&K would agree, is the sort of standard for the English language. The main sort of, this is the authority on the language. That's what most people consider it as. It was your edition, I was going to use Merriam-Webster, but I figured Oxford would be a little more appropriate for the worldwide usage. And yeah, so I was really fucking upset about what happened, and I was like, let's go through this comment, and I do agree that simile on its own is a little, not silly, but it's not very satisfying, especially when I can do better. So TG&K claims a few things in his comment. The first being, I don't understand the language. I'll mention that later. The second is that strange is the determiner for a trait made in speech, and the thing that makes the realm between realms strange to Kratos is that their tree branch is stretching out to infinity. Now, just to be clear here, that's under the impression you believe this is Kratos' perspective. I'll talk about that. But one thing I think I mentioned this in the video. Ragnarok completely debunks this position. Like, the game Ragnarok goes out of its way to provide a statement in particular, and you can argue a few other ones as well, but one in particular that completely debunks this position. Like, this is like objectively fucking wrong by Ragnarok standards. Don't worry, I will include that in this video, even though the God of War 4 novel ignored that sort of content. And finally, again, I already talked about him criticizing sweeping us with the simile, sweeping it away as it's a simile. Again, it is a simile, so you can still argue that that's, the situation, but I'll be fair here. We'll ignore the simile position, and we'll just go straight into it. Okay, so let's get the easiest one out of the way. Strange is a determiner for a trait made in speech. I think, so this one's kind of weird. Because at first I thought he was saying strange is a determiner, which he technically is, but I think he means it's an adjective. Because that's basically what an adjective does, and strange is not a determiner, it's an adjective. So I'm not gonna really harp on this one too much. I'm just a little, that was just a little confusing, because I even looked on the dictionary to see if that's what an adjective is described as, and it's not. So he would be the only person I've ever encountered who, like, says strange is a calls an adjective like that. So I don't know, that's just something that was a little confusing to me. I did go through and check, because again I went to the Oxford Dictionary, and it's just a word naming an attribute of a noun such as sweet, red, or technical. So he's technically wrong, because not only is strange not a determiner, it's an adjective, but it's also not for a trait made in speech. It's for a trait to a noun, technically, but again, it's more accurately to say that it is a attribute, not a trait. But I think attribute and trait are not similes, they're synonyms. So I don't know. There's nothing really to respond there to. It's not. I guess it's not a determiner, I guess is what I'm saying. It's an adjective. Also, he misspelled speech, and he also misspelled simile. If you're gonna harp on someone for fucking up the English language or not understanding the English language, least you could do is spell words that are super easy to fucking spell. But yeah, so that's the first point, I guess. Just clarify. I'm assuming that's clarifying him, because I think he meant adjective. He just didn't fucking say it. Because again, it's not a determiner for anything. It's just a trait. For a noun, or it's an attribute. So moving on. Real quick, futures in. Yes. Attribute and trait are synonyms when attribute is in its noun form, which for the purposes of the dictionary definition, I think it would be, so that's fine. Now, you might be wondering why I even bothered to correct myself on that. Well, I am an English major who has an associate's in the English language working towards a bachelor. Very successful student, so I've been studying the English language for a long time. Although, I've been studying more of its applications and its uses more nowadays than its actual bare, gears, if we'll call it. The bare, essentials. So, I kind of like being, a bit correct about these things when it's important, like today. Regardless, the whole strange thing literally means fuck all, because this only matters if it's coming from Kratos' perspective, which is what TG&K claims, and I'm assuming others in his position claim as well. I'm gonna have to disagree on this one, because the sentence is clearly written like a generic third-person perspective, like something for the reader to get an idea of what the area is like, especially when other sections that do directly involve Kratos' thoughts and feelings are not only more directly blatant in their statements that they're talking about Kratos, but they're also a lot easier to attribute to Kratos. The problem is that this statement is so neutral that it's clear that the strange environment is not from Kratos' perspective. It's just what the, narrator is calling the environment, what the narrator is attributing to the environment, so the audience has an idea of what they're working with. And the realm between realms in the actual fucking game, or whatever the fuck it's called, this realm you go to when you're fast traveling, essentially, if I recall correctly, that's where you go to go through this. It's a pretty fucking strange location. You're on a tree branch and the sky's a nice cosmic fucking blue. It's a pretty fucking weird area. It'd be very strange, and to call it a strange environment is a good way to describe it, especially if you don't want to get into detail. It lets the audience fill in the gaps, and especially since this is talking about a visual medium, I don't think they were actually going to describe it in complete detail. There's no reason to. So no, it's not written from Kratos' perspective, but even if it was, it still wouldn't really matter. Now, not only that, for the description section, he's not even in the realm between realms yet, because in the next page is when we're told that he goes into it. Quote from the very next page. They stepped into the nebulous mist of the realm between realms, where light swirled around them as if scrutinizing the invaders. So this would basically mean that they finally step into the realm between realms. So on top of this being a third person sort of example, we're just getting a perspective of someone looking through the door and barely, and technically it doesn't say they poked their head in. It doesn't say they actually were able to look in. It just says from the, what it actually says here is from the doorway. He swung open the door to reveal a mystic gateway to the strange environment, like a tree branch stretching out to infinity. So our perspective would be that Kratos has opened the door, he's standing outside the door, and he's looking at it the same way you would look at a painting of a highway driving off, you know, or, you know, going off into the distance. That's how Kratos would be looking at this. So he doesn't step in till later. And we don't get any infinite attributes later from what I understand. This is the only sentence. So even if it was from Kratos' perspective, it would still be wonky as fuck since he's not seeing the whole distance. He's looking at it like, again, as I just described. But even then, it's still written from the narrator's perspective. But even if all that were untrue, if I was incorrect about the narrator saying it was Kratos, and Kratos was inside it, it still wouldn't really matter because of what the sentence is actually saying. Now, so this is where the whole strange part, again, didn't really fucking matter for anything because it's separated by a comma. So regardless the attributes or the sort of like comparison that's being given here, because even if like is not a simile, it would still be comparing to, like, you know, something to something else. It would be comparing the environment to the statement after like. So strange doesn't really matter here because the statement would still be applying to that, you know, environment anyways. Again, just the whole strange point never really fucking mattered. So the second part of the sentence, like a tree branch stretching out to infinity. So right off the bat, this does not mean what it means they mean. Or more accurately, it's possible it could mean what they claim it means for stretching out, but it doesn't necessarily mean over, if that makes sense. So the way they are interpreting this statement is like a tree branch stretching out to infinity, implying that the tree branch would be stretching out infinitely. But that's not entirely how it works. So first off, 2 ruins this sentence in its entirety, and I'll explain more about that later. But because 2 separates infinity from the tree branch, stretching out now just means stretching out to something. Infinity is a noun. So to put this in perspective for a minute, stretching out to infinity. So imagine if you were sitting on a couch, and at the very end of the couch, in an area you cannot reach, there is a remote. There's the remote to the TV. If you were to stretch out your hand as far as you could in the direction of that remote, I could write it as you stretching out your arm to the remote. That doesn't guarantee you have reached the remote. It doesn't guarantee you are beyond the remote. It just means you are stretching out in the direction of the remote. This is just another example of them trying to take the highest possible interpretation for a novel that's, unfortunately, for most average people will be fine, but for a power scaler, especially by their standards, from what they've told me, would be a little more nebulous in its usage. It's the exact same wording as what this branch is given, and you would still have not gone to the remote. I have a script, but I'm also going to ad-lib a little bit. So without more definitive evidence to work with, this is where I would say this is what you would assume. Because it's possible to assume it that way, maybe, you know, the way they're claiming is what I would say, but no. Because without more definitive evidence, it should be assumed the way I'm saying it because infinity is a noun. However, that was before I got like annoyed, or no, that's where I got fucking mad at the way that, you know, at our last conversation. And because I was so livid, I broke down the sentence in its entirety. And what caught my eye a little bit more carefully, because again, I was casual about this the first time, was the word to. So because the word to is placed in the sentence, it's practically next to impossible to interpret it the way many like TG and K have interpreted it, which I find very strange because if TG and K understood the fucking language he spoke the way he claims we don't, he would actually know that he's reading the sentence wrong in its entirety, at least when it comes for power scaling to claim the world tree is infinite in size, but I'm just going to assume he's ignorant in the subject he's speaking on and not assume malicious intent because I have no reason to believe that. While to does have 2 separate versions, I'm not going to use the infinitive form because infinity is a noun, it's not a verb, and the infinitive is meant to be used for more verbal or more verb-like, you know, words in a sentence. So we'll just be using the prepositional version. Even if we did, the only version of infinitive that would be applicable here is the first one, and it still doesn't help their case. So of the prepositional versions of to, the only ones that apply are the first two. That would be expressing motion in the direction of, parentheses, a particular location, or approaching or reaching, parentheses, a particular condition. Now, honestly, stretching out to infinity is not a condition in this case, since the examples are switching it over to an actual change in, like, the actual, you know, branch. If it were to be number 2, the branch will be changing into some other position, like smash to smithereens, the branch being astonished, or, you know, showing emotion as some of the examples show here. So only number 1 matters. Expressing motion in direction of a particular location. Notice that that does not mean going across a particular location or extending beyond a particular location. Again, unfortunately, infinity is a noun. So this would just be the tree branch stretching out to infinity the same way I would stretch out to the sky. I'm not reaching the sky. Technically, the tree branch doesn't even stated to reach infinity. It's just stated to be stretching out in the direction of infinity, which infinity is a noun in the purposes of this sentence and in general purposes when infinity is used as gone by its description or definition. So again, reaching out to the sky. I'd also argue this is supported by the visuals of the realm between realms, because the actual realm between realms is outside the area when you're not on the branch, in this bluish void that seems to have no end in sight, which is exactly how this statement sounds like. In order to read this sentence the way the God of War guys would be interpreting this statement, the statement would read something more like, he swung open the door to reveal mystic gateway to a strange environment, one with a tree branch stretching out infinitely. That is what they're reading it as, more or less. Now, I've made it more blatant than it probably would have been. It'd probably say with the tree branch stretching out infinitely, etc., etc. The point is it wouldn't say to infinity. It would say infinitely. Now, I already mentioned this. I am using the Oxford Dictionary, so it's entirely possible that maybe a different dictionary has, you know, slight differences, but I'm going with Oxford because it's the most credible worldwide, and it's also the hardest to change as well from what I've researched, but I could be a little wrong on that one. I'm mainly using Oxford because America uses the Merriam-Webster dictionary, but I'm aware TG&K isn't a resident of America, so I wanted to go for something that might be more neutral ground in case maybe our definitions in America were wrong in comparison to what he would be using. So, while I do believe this is a simile and it shouldn't be used because, you know, flowerful language and the like, I've broken down this sentence more clearly to illustrate why a statement doesn't work the way they claim it does and why it should never have been used to begin with. Now, even if you disagree with some of what I said, I should have provided enough evidence to make it clear that this can be interpreted validly in a number of ways that are not just the way TG&K and the God of War guys or scalers would interpret it. Granted, again, I believe based on the evidence presented, what the words mean, you can't even interpret it the way they claim it should be because, again, the way the sentence is structured and the way it's written. However, there should be clearly established that there are at least 2 valid interpretations that exist that say different things here for the sentence. I'm not even, you know, fuck it. Their interpretation is not fucking valid. Fuck it. I've been, gosh darn, fucking takes a while. Point is, that's not the way you fucking read the sentence. None of the dictionary definitions support them. If they knew the fucking English language, they fucking understand that. But you know what the worst part about this whole fucking shenanigans is? Ragnarok debunks their position in its entirety. There's no argument that the world tree branches can be infinite. What's what Ragnarok fucking says? The fact that they even argue for this statement still is fucking absurd. Alright, sorry, I had to get that off my chest. So, regarding what Ragnarok says, I mentioned Ragnarok earlier. Ragnarok directly confirms that if the world tree grows too wild, the branches would fall off. Now, I assume that weight potentially couldn't be an issue here because I thought that gravity most likely didn't exist between the realm between realms. Because after all, this is a tree that transcends time and space, blah, 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 blah. I presented this to fucking my, Kyle and them to get feedback and criticisms if need be, mainly on my arguments. And that's where they pointed out that, mainly Kyle pointed this out, that if gravity wasn't there, mass shouldn't matter, or anything of that shouldn't matter because there'd be nothing acting on the tree. Therefore, it shouldn't get too heavy as to fall off. So gravity has to be affecting the tree, which means that my initial point about trying to be fair here and go for a mass argument just ultimately doesn't matter, because if weight's an issue, which it should be if it can get too heavy to fall off, if the world tree can grow so massive, or if the branches can grow because to grow wildly just means to grow out in several directions without anyone sort of pruning your branches and keeping it from falling off. It's what gardeners do. they prune branches so it doesn't get too heavy and fall off. So if that can happen, like if it can get, regardless of how it grows, if it can get big enough to where it'll fall off, the branch will just literally just fall off. Here, let me actually get the direct quote just to make sure I'm not being wrong here. So I'll just read Ratatosker, the fucking squirrel gods thing. I've already been here for like an hour or two already. Fuck it. The tree has become rather overgrown, and if it grows too wildly, the branches risk getting too heavy and falling, which is not ideal considering they hold all the realms. That means if the world tree's you know, has the possibility, the branches, of getting so big by growing wildly that they would fall off, and by getting too heavy, that means it can't be infinite in size. Because if you're infinite in size, that would also mean you have infinite weight attached to you, since you'd have infinite mass, and there shouldn't be any more added weight that would make you fall off if you're infinite. That's, you know, not how infinite works. That's not how infinity works. Ragnarok directly debunks the idea that the world tree branches could be infinite in size. Also, the statement would say branch, so I also could mention that like the roots are pruned as well by Needhog eating them, so even the roots aren't infinite in size. But the statement says branch, so I'm not going to do that. That just completely debunks the idea of them being infinite in size. So I hope I've sufficiently provided evidence that I do understand the English language well enough, and that maybe my years of studying the English language in college weren't entirely a waste. If you have any counter arguments or counter responses, feel free to put them down in the comments below. I'm more than willing to look over, you know, like counterpoints and the like. I think I've made a pretty definitive argument here, though, so if you have anything, you know, you'd like to disagree with, by all means, feel free to let me know. Thank you guys for your time, as always. Have a nice day. I'll see you guys on the next streamer video. Take care, everybody.